So again, this is coming from a macro strat gender perspective, which is quite different than what we do. We're really good at modeling sentiments, obviously, and interactions on an individual level. But the macro strat people look at it differently. Okay, so I'm working on this. I was a lecturer at Wake Forest, and Catherine Harnois is working with me on this, but she couldn't be here. Okay, so again, one of the big questions in gender strat is why do occupations with more females pay less on average than occupations with more men? And this is one of the most fundamental questions, because when we look at why women on average have less money, it's because they're often in jobs that pay less. So while we look at within occupation differences, right, like a female doctor does get paid less than a comparable male doctor, but the fact that females are probably going to be nurses rather than doctors, now you're talking about big money differences. You're not talking about 10% differences. You're talking about 100% differences. So we want to understand, why is it that female-dominated occupations like teaching, nursing, things like that are paid less? And there's really two current dominant perspectives, at least in the macrostrat literature. And really this comes from Paula England, Acker, and other people like that. And the first one's devaluation. And it essentially says that in patriarchal society, we devalue women, and anything associated with femininity and women are, such as caring, nurturing, warmth, are economically devalued. So theoretically, there should be in their models a direct negative correlation to wages, controlling for other things. The economists, mostly with human capital theory, argue no, you don't even need to include sentiments or gender traits at all. You can actually fully account for the difference in occupational wages. And again, this isn't people in the occupation, it's occupation itself. That it's a gender neutral function of occupational features, especially differences in specialized training. Because yes, while women do have more college, that falls under general education, not specialized training. And general education, I'm just saying what your argument. I see you shaking your head. The argument is that specialized training is a higher risk type of human capital because it's less portable. You can take your PhD and you can change occupations, but if you learn electrical codes and now you're a tree trimmer, that investment in education is gone. So you have to compensate that higher because it's very high risk, right? And this is the argument. And it's really made by Tam, who shows that if you model occupational characteristics, you can completely account for gender differences at the level of occupations. But again, we're not talking about individuals in occupations. We're talking about the occupation itself. So according to their theoretical model, you don't even need cultural sentiments because they have no direct effect, right? Okay. Despite decades of this debate, they're at a stalemate. Both sides have built up a mass of research showing that their side is right and they're positive that they're right and the other person's wrong. I actually talked to a gender scholar who called human capital theory debunked. And I said, well, if you talk to human capital theorists, you know. One of the main issues, at least in the strat literature, is there's no direct measure of gender traits in the models. That the attempts to use different measures to model evaluation and the different dimensions of meaning, for example, prestige scores, have been shown to be problematic, which I showed last time. So what happens is, in this literature, the evaluation scholars typically use what's called a residual approach, where they model everything objective and whatever is left unexplained is assumed to be some sort of discrimination or evaluation. And again, human capital scholars, they don't even bother. When you look at Tam's analysis, there is nothing in there about gender except for the gender of the worker, right? Nothing about traits. And in there was a recent debate in sex roles, the journal Sex Roles, where the human capital scholars and the gender scholars argued what we need to move this forward. And really the answer was, we really need a direct measure of these gendered meanings. Because one, Harnois, how do you pronounce his name, says, you know what, one, evaluation just might be wrong. And two, without a direct measure, we don't know how these meanings interact with objective characteristics of the occupation. Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're here for, right? So, okay. So again, we have very sophisticated models of meaning structure, but I would argue at the macro level, not so good. So depending on the perspective, they go by different labels, whether it's instrumental versus expressive, potent, evaluative, bias map, right? We've got confidence, warmth. But when you distill it down, they all reflect essentially two separate constructs. Masculinity is defined in terms of power, competence, right? That men are assumed to be more competent. That femininity is good, caring, warmth, right? And I should say, yes, they look very much like EPA, but they don't have a direct, I'm not arguing they have a direct one-to-one correspondence, but interestingly, this is such a powerful effect that you can see it everywhere. Actually, flying here yesterday, I was eating my lunch at Newark Airport, and I looked at the magazine stand, and it so struck me that I actually took a picture. And what we see is women, Doris Day, love and marriage, nurturing babies, right? Oh, Kate and Pippa talking about how their sister bonds are getting stronger, right? And obviously, sex objects, right? You go to, what were the guys' things? We have baseball, making things, again, that instrumentality. Winning the Stanley Cup, right? You're doing stuff, you're winning, adventuring, and again, strength, right? So these are very powerful cultural dimensions. And again, I didn't go searching for this. I was eating my lunch yesterday, and it shows the strength of these cultural ideas, right? So what I argue is, one, not only do we need we need a direct measure, we actually need a more comprehensive theoretical framework. Because devaluation at a theoretical level is arguing that it's at the level of individuals devaluating certain traits, that it's about wage setting. And if we do human capital, then it's about women choosing at an individual level what occupations best suit them, right? But Reisman, who came up with her theory of gender as social structure, argued that is just too limited of a model of how meanings and gender works. You have to look at the individual level, that how we appraise ourselves versus cultural norms. We have to look at interactional, that you say, hey, Kim, maybe you should be a nurse. You know, that's professor thing. Yeah, it's not working for you. You know, you don't want to hurt yourself. And then the institutional level, the ingrained rules at the organizational level about promotion, about advancement. And again, you talk about these mythic models that men are the ideal workers, etc., right? So Reisman argues to actually answer that question, you actually need a bigger, more comprehensive model. Because one thing about sentiments, they cross levels of analysis, that the same meanings of doctor, of nurse, of professors are the same meanings across institutions. That they're the same meanings across the individual. So when I'm a man and I say, should I be a manager or an executive, right? They're the same meanings that she's going to use to say, maybe I'm just not that good at this, right? And Cecilia Ridgway argues you can't just look at meanings in the workplace because they originate in the home, right? That we make collective decisions about, you know, if we're married, how we should divide the division of labor in the house, domestic duties versus paid labor, right? These aren't things that just occur in the workforce. So when we think about it, while Reisman's model is a good theoretical model, she argues it's an analytic model, but to do that, it needs more detail. Going from Giddens and Sewell about the dual nature of structures, right? Not only are there the material resource distributions, there's also the meaning structure that tells you how to enact the structure, right? So in this, not surprisingly, argue EPA is a pretty good way to model it. Right? And this has a really important implication, and we understand this as social psychologists, but I don't think the macro people have, because this assumes that sentiments are a multidimensional construct, that femininity isn't just about being good, it's also about being good and unique, right? That In the strat literature, when they try to model it, they've shown that they model the dimensions separately. So they try to show that some measure of goodness, like prestige, and how that affects wages, right? But we understand it's a multidimensional construct. And when we think of practices in our culture, right? Fathers giving away bribes, men opening doors for women, they don't just convey how good women are, but it also conveys, well, one, it conveys that they're worthy of esteem, but also that they're weak, and that men have to be a strong protector, provider, right? So it's this combination of power and goodness at the same time, right? So femininity isn't just about goodness. It's about goodness at the same time, about being weak. And one other thing we argue in this paper is that relative to wages, only potency is directly related to wages. And this is important because what it does, it's in another slide. What it does is it has several implications. One, that the occupational wage gap is not just devaluation of human capital. It's a manifestation of this whole multidimensional gender structure, operating at all the different levels all at the same time, right? Second, by having only potency directly to wages, right, it allows wage setting to look like it's based on competence and skills, and for the human capital scholars to say, well, gender and femininity has no direct effect, right? But it does in a more complex, nuanced way. And then the third thing is it argues that the debate is no longer just why do we devalue women, it becomes why do we overvalue masculinity? At least at a wage level.
Which
right?
maybe explains why male consultants just have to be told they're not the consultant to get upset.
Yeah. So to show that we are correct, right, what I did was, again, in the macro lit, we're really good at modeling at the individual level, but at the macro lit, you've got to show a representative sample of meanings and occupations. So obviously I use the same EPA. And then at the individual level, I connected those occupational identities to the American Community Survey to get measures for gender, age, race, and income. And then for the human capital models, connected it to the Department of Labor's occupational network to get occupational characteristics like the degree of specialized training, complex problem solving, physical labor, service orientation, and other things that would affect wages, right? At the level of descriptives, I won't go too far into this, but when we look at the level of descriptives, that when we look at the top 20 highest concentrated occupations with women, we see that the devaluation story does come through. That the highest occupations for women, lots of college, high evaluation, lower potency, and lower money, right? This is essentially the evaluation theory argument. But when we start modeling it with the representative sample, we find that evaluation doesn't have a direct correlation to wages, right? What does is potency. So now we got to put it all together. We actually have to model it all at once. And when we start off, we put occupational SVP, specialized vocational preparation, essentially on-the-job training, right? It reflects the human capital model that, yes, there's a negative for female, but essentially we have predictors of vocational prep, service orientation, etc. But when we put in complex problem solving, right, these now can account for the gender differences at the macro occupational level. That essentially complex problem solving and differences in training actually account for the occupational gender wage gap. But as I said before, Tam argued he can fully account for the gender wage gap. But interestingly, if we just put in EPA, it can do the same thing. So it shows just accounting for the wage gap is not enough. This is the first study that shows now you have to account for meaning, because if both can do it, you actually don't know what's actually happening. So then we put it all together, and what we see is sort of a mixture. That yes, indeed, Complex problem solving and vocational prep do matter. And again, evaluation does not have a direct effect on wages, but potency does. So again, yeah, that's
I thought they were p-values, not.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, so essentially what these models show is that when we put EPA into these strat models, that we have to think about it differently. It's not just evaluation, and it's not just women choosing low power fields, but we think about the whole structure of the gender system, sorting women into fields that are involve less preparation and lower complex problem solving. So then, essentially, what I'm arguing is within the strat literature, yeah, this is that story about the blind man and the elephant, that essentially what the human capital scholars have done is they just look at competence, skills, without looking at EPA or any sentiments. But the evaluation, without a direct model, they really can't look how these things interact. So essentially, at least from the strat perspective, the problem has been they've been using unidimensional approaches to essentially a multidimensional construct. Some of the contributions of this study is EPA was a pretty good measure, right? And it's actually kind of astounding that they've had these dimensions of masculine, feminine, yet they don't model it. So I think that's one of the good, big innovations of the new data set, that now we have a representative sample to show how the distribution of EPA across occupations can actually be modeled. So that's a pretty big advance, I think, from a empirical contribution, which allows us to model directly. But also then we think about the debate about what is gender doing in relation to wages. That's not just these simple direct things, but it's in a complex way that disadvantages women while masking that disadvantage. It allows people to look at the potency side and ignore the evaluation side and say, oh, it's about competence, it's about skills, when in fact it's about like the whole multidimensional structure of it. Thank you. All right.